Hello and welcome to The Real Talk. My name is Sierra, and today we have Vernon, BC resident Dawn Tucker. We'll be going through Dawn's journey growing up queer, supporting LGBTQIA+ youth, and their work in the community. Let's get into it. Welcome, Dawn.
Thank you.
Yeah, I'm so excited to have you here today. So we're going to hop right into it here. So can you share what it was like growing up queer in Vernon, and how did this community shape your identity?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think in a lot of ways it's you don't really know you're growing up queer. I think other people kind of know you're growing up queer. They figure it out often before you do. And, it was an interesting experience. Had things like bottles thrown at me from cars and apple thrown at me. Growing up, you definitely kind of figured out who was queer and who was trans because people would talk about them and they would let you know it was not a good thing. You definitely heard a lot of slurs, and people would point out that it was negative. Growing up at that time period, of course, we had the AIDS crisis going on, and so there was a lot of negativity towards anybody in the community or anybody in general that was gay. And gay was the overarching terminology that was used towards anybody that was part of the queer community. And yeah, at that point, growing up, I would be playing sports and those kinds of things. And of course, would be playing women's sports. And women at that time were, pretty close-minded. And I remember playing in the women's soccer league as a teenager. In Vernon, and in our league there was one woman who was openly out and had a partner and everything, and she was known in the league, and pretty much generally across the league was mocked, and slurs were thrown her way just openly and hatefully, and it was difficult to listen to that, especially if at that point where you're sort of questioning, like, I kind of have an idea that maybe this might be something that fits, and I don't understand why everybody hates this. And when you're looking at things like, am I part of this community? And then all you're hearing from everybody is negativity. When you watch television, you're watching talk shows that just came out. You're watching Phil Donahue, you're watching Oprah Winfrey, you're watching Sally Jessy Raphael, and all you're seeing on there is queer people, and you're seeing them being hated, and you're hearing that you're going to die. You're going to get AIDS, you're going to die, and nobody likes you. Like, that's not the thing to be. And so growing up in a place like Vernon, you learn that that's not what you should be. Because if you are that way, you're going to be ostracized and you're going to be hated. So it was it was something where, even our school counselors would, if you came out to them, and of course I never came out to my school counselors or to anybody when I was a teenager, wouldn't be till I was in my 20s. At that time, if you did though, you were often told stay in the closet, and when you graduated from high school, leave town and go to the bigger cities and basically come out there where it's safer and you're going to find actual community, because there was, virtually nobody here. And certainly you're not welcome in the same sense that you would be if you were heterosexual.
How did the lack of representation of the LGBTQIA+ affect you during your formative years?
Well, I think it definitely made things more difficult, because when you don't have representation, you learn who you are through representation. And like I said, when it came to talk shows and that, what you learn from that is that who I am, and you're not having role models. I mean, this is why sports figures are important. This is why people in leadership positions are important. This is why adults are important, because they teach kids who they are. They show kids this is who you can be. And if you're not reflected in that, if you don't see yourself in anybody out there, where does that leave you? then you're like, well, who am I and what am I? And does this make me wrong? And I think that that's something that's really important to remember. Kids need reflection. They need to know that they're okay. And they need to know that they're not something that's wrong. And that people out there are people that they can be like. And, it's very different than being someone who's a person of color, because that's something that's very visible and very seen. So you can see who's a member of your community. But if you can't see who's a member of your community or who represents you, then it becomes like you're lost. You're just there and you just don't know. And it's a very discombobulating kind of feeling where you're left out there. So that's why I'm a big proponent of visibility. And that's in a lot of ways why the 80s movement, ACT UP, became such a powerhouse because of the AIDS crisis, because that force in the 80s, and maybe people who weren't born back then don't know about it, but it's something that people should learn about. ACT UP became such a force because they wanted people to know that there were a lot of people that were gay, that were in positions of power, that were in the entertainment industry and in the sports industry. And so they forcibly outed them in order to make that point, to make them visible for the rest of the population, because it was only until they were visible would we actually make gains politically and have rights, because we didn't. I mean, there wasn't the right to marry. There wasn't basic human rights. I mean, all of these things that we now take for granted, we didn't gain until we got that visibility, and they weren't doing anything about queer people dying. I mean, the fact of the matter is people were celebrating it. And when we look at the flavor of the way politically things are going now, where literally I get people telling me, just wait until that reckoning comes again, because people want us to die. People really want us, they want to kill us. So there's a segment of the population that is still in that mood today, as they were in the 80s. I think it's important that visibility is still really important today, just as much as it was in the 80s. And although I'm really happy with the fact that more people are feeling able to just be who they are and to be out there and to be able to proudly say it, and less people are hiding it in the closet.
Let's get into your experience with coming out. What was your experience? What challenges did you face, and how did you find support during this time?
Good question. So when I came out, I was in university, and it was interesting. I had been thinking about coming out because I had just kind of gotten my first girlfriend. And so that's, at that point, you're kind of like, okay, I need to do something, right? You're spending time with a person, and there's that point of, well, I need to kind of make it known. And so coming out to my parents was interesting. I planned on coming out to my dad first, because obviously I was living with my dad, my grandmother at the time. We were all cohabitating in my house. But I actually ended up coming out to my mom first. And so I was riding in my mom's vehicle on the way back we had gone to yard sales or something, and she had bought some high chair, and she was talking about grandbabies and other things, and she's like, and I just offhand said, it's like, what makes you think I'm going to have grandbabies? And she goes, well, it's not like you're gay or something, right? I said, well, what if I am? And so it led into that, and then she went into this whole thing about, obviously, how did I know? Because had I not been with a man yet? And I was like, well, no, and I don't want to be. And, and she says, well, have I been abused? And I said, no. And what if I had? But no, I haven't. But I know, and I know who I am. But it was a very strange conversation, and yet this was the conversation we went through, because ultimately she was trying to figure out, is this just a phase? And it was like, no, it's not a phase. But it was the conversation, and it was so odd, and I could see her trying to wrap her head around it and trying to figure out, well, what is this and why? And it was so odd. So that was coming out to my mom, which was very odd, all because she'd bought a high chair and was thinking about grandbabies.
And you were in your 20s.
I was in my 20s, yeah.
Yeah. So a little bit, I mean,
And at that point I'd had a couple of boyfriends, and none of which had been anything serious, and not that she'd ever been around them either. So it was very odd. So at that point I knew I had to tell my dad now. So oddly enough, I told my dad in a vehicle too. And so his hands clutched the steering wheel when I told him. Of course, in a trapped space, it's always best to talk to somebody about these things. Yeah, he wasn't too happy about it. He didn't quite understand it. I don't remember a lot about the conversation other than the fact that he wasn't too pleased. I think, knowing now, I mean, I've talked with a lot of kids who've come out and talked to them about what's going on. I know what goes on with parents, and ultimately what's going on is they're really mourning what they wanted for you. And especially back then, and even now today, I mean, parents are afraid of what's happening to you and what could happen to you. Like, they're worried about you getting hurt. They're worried about whether or not you'll be happy. They worry about your life, whether or not, like, will you ever find somebody? Will you be loved? You know, what kind of life is this going to be, especially in that time period? I mean, coming out in my 20s, now we're into the early 90s, and things are still not great. And so, you know, and they've grown up around a lot of homophobia and a lot of hate. And yeah, it was interesting. And so part of the reason my dad kind of knew too was my grandma had told him that my girlfriend had driven my vehicle, and he was not happy about that. And the first 6 months of dating this girl, my dad wouldn't talk to her directly. So we'd be sitting in the same room, and he'd say something about her, but not talk to her directly, and just talk to me. So that was awkward and weird. But he broke out of it, and eventually, I mean, he was good with her, because we were together a couple of years. So, and she helped caregive for my grandmother and stuff over time. And yeah, it was interesting, and I mean, now obviously he's super accepting, and my mom is okay. So yeah, it was interesting. And then coming out to my sports teams was also very interesting with my first girlfriend and everything. There was a lot of girls on the team that were religious, and so there was obviously that pull. They were okay in a sense. They knew. It's not like I actually came out to them, but they knew. And so there was that. I mean, my soccer teams had already kind of known in a sense, and other things, because I was always put in the visitors room when we went to tournaments. I mean, I was already othered. I was already put in with all of the players we got picked up. I was never put in the rooms with our teammates. So they had already othered me, along with a couple of the other girls that they had figured might be. And so, I mean, that was kind of the things that they did anyway. It's kind of like, well, they're weird, or they don't fit in, or they possibly could be, so we're going to put them over here. And so, you know, I don't think things were necessarily a surprise. Like I said, other people kind of knew anyway. And what was interesting is when I went away to finish up my teacher training, of course I couldn't play for that year, and then I came back, and then those teams didn't want to have me on there. And so it was a real interesting eye-opener for me to be like, okay, I see the homophobia in as an illustration of kind of what is going on in that sense. So it was difficult that way too, to sort of see where, you know, certain people on certain teams might have some influence over being able to play on certain teams. But that happened at that time, right? And it wasn't necessarily all the individuals on the teams. I think it's certain players had difficulties accepting it at that time period. Yeah, it was difficult coming out, and I think what was more difficult is just understanding that once you're out, you know, things change. People change. Like, they're not going to treat you the same, because if they have certain belief systems or they're a certain way, then you can't go backwards. But once I had a girlfriend and all of those kinds of things, I couldn't stay in the closet. And that's the big difference, I think, for me over some other people, is once I knew who I was, once I had somebody in my life I cared about. And even after after we broke up or anything else like that, I couldn't go backwards. Like, it was always forward, and I was never going to go back in the closet. I could never not be true to myself. I could never not be who I was. And people already knew anyway, obviously, before I came out or suspected or whatever. So it was like, I might as well own who I am, and I might as well be who I am. And the fact of the matter is it's important to just allow myself to be that and make sure that at least I'm happy. You can't please people. Like, if people aren't going to accept you or, for who you are, like, if they're going to other you and put you in that place, they're doing it whether you know who you are or not. And that was a clear example. So you might as well enjoy who you are and be who you are and not worry about that, because it doesn't matter. The issue's with them, it's not with you. And so that's really was my experience. It was, there were people that were really supportive, and there were people that kind of fell off. And it just showed who they were. And they were just acquaintances. They weren't really true people. And so it was a good experience in that sense. Like, I wouldn't say that it was there were trying times. Like, there were definitely worrisome times of, like, when I was coming out of, like, how are people going to react? And this was always the time period where you worry if you're going to end up with family or without. And I think there's still that's still the case for many people when they come out. Because there's always that fear of whether you're going to lose family or friends and that, but I would say they're not really your true friends if they won't accept you for who you are. And it's, families, if they're going to be there for you, they're going to be there for you. And if they're not, then, you will find other family. Family's not necessarily by blood. And, so that was my experience.
What motivated you to become a teacher, and how has your own journey influenced your approach to mentoring youth?
Great question. Part of the reason I became a teacher was actually because of my family. So my grandmother was a teacher, and she taught elementary school mostly. And then my dad, in a way, still is a teacher in a sense. So he's taught many things. He's taught scuba diving, and he was a master instructor trainer. So he actually could teach all the way up to, he taught instructors how to teach diving. And then he also still teaches training courses to this day for Rotax engines for experimental and ultralight aircraft. So he's still teaching, but my grandmother was a school teacher, and that motivated me to teach, because what appealed to me about teaching is the fact that you are passing along knowledge, and you're basically you're inspiring minds. Like, you're there to open doors and basically be a guide and allowing people to find themselves. And I had really great teachers myself going through schools, and especially when you're struggling with certain things, or you're having times when you're not sure, teachers are great role models. And I wanted to be able to be there for youth. And so it kind of influenced me, and I wanted to be able to be there for youth and to be a reflection in the community for queer youth. And so that kind of inspired me to go into teaching. And I loved the subject areas. And so it was never meant to be a forever position. It was always meant to be a forever as I loved it. One of the things from the moment I started my teacher education is I knew that I would be an out teacher. I would be out to students, I would be out to staff, and that I wanted myself to be seen as a whole person, because what I'd often seen in schools is, yes, I knew that there were queer teachers and queer support staff and that existed in schools, but they didn't make themselves known. Every teacher that you knew usually talked about their spouse and their kids and their dog and everything else just as who they were, and you got to know them, except for the queer ones. And that was something that was problematic, because as I mentioned before, there was no reflection. You couldn't see yourself reflected. Youth weren't able to see who represented them. And I wanted that to change. And so it was important to me that kids got to see that there were teachers in there that represented all kinds of things. And not just being queer, because queer isn't just who I am. That's not everything that I am. I also have a learning disability, and I'm also have a physical disability. So having those kinds of things out there as well, and that students know about, allows them to see, especially with my learning disability, that you could be a teacher even with dyslexia and those kinds of things. And that's important for youth, because a lot of kids with learning disabilities don't realize they can go to university, they can get a couple of degrees, and they can go and be a professional. They think, well, I can't do this. And so I think it's important for youth to be able to see, people are there that just like them, and that they can achieve certain things, and that people exist in the fields that they want to be in. And so that was important to me, and I wanted to be there for youth, especially youth at that age where they may be struggling and they may be looking for help. And what was really great in starting my career is being able to be in a time where, especially at the time when I started my career as well, when none of these things were really being addressed. And so it was kind of good to be at that sort of beginning point where we sort of started addressing it on a community basis, and then we kind of moved into the schools and started addressing it there, which was kind of neat.
Can you talk about the workshops and safe spaces you help create in schools?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, part of the work that I did when I was in the schools, because I started work originally working with youth, queer youth mostly. First, I worked in the community with Youth Glow, which was a NOIFAS youth group that they had. And then when Youth Glow, I think their funding ended. And so when that group sort of closed up, then it was back to the schools. And then a bunch of the queer youth that had been in those groups still wanted something. And so they approached me to start a gay-straight alliance. And of course, our school district here didn't have anything. And so I started the first gay-straight alliance, and I was the teacher sponsor for that. And of course, gay-straight alliances that was the thing in the day. Now they're very outdated, and now we have more diversity clubs and other types of organizations within the schools that are taking that kind of role. But we started doing a lot of work around creating different spaces for youth, and even for that teachers and other things could do. And part of what we wanted to do was to create a safe space within the schools for kids, and the Gay Straight Alliances were one of those spaces. And part of it was by putting up things like posters for kids and everything else like that. And I'd started to do that even before the Gay Straight Alliance, because I was teaching planning at the time, career and personal planning. And if you're as old as I am, we had consumer ed, and consumer ed had morphed into career and personal planning. So during that course, I would teach resumes and all of these other things. And so I deigned to put up things like posters for helplines at the coast for queer youth and those kinds of things. And I'd come into my classroom and find them gone, and then find out that I'd have to go down to the administrator's office to discuss why I would put such posters up in my room, because they were the realm of the counseling office. And I would say, what do you mean? They're for youth, and I teach career and personal planning anyway, and why can't I have them in there? But it was these kinds of questions that, again, were parts of the times where it's kind of like, well, why can't I have posters up for queer youth and other things? And, I teach this kind of stuff anyway. And why does it have to only be in the counseling office? This doesn't make sense. Why are we segregating it into this sacred spot? But this was part and parcel of the times where they didn't want to have these things. And so, and when people do that kind of stuff to me, it only eggs me on to do more. So I would put more and more posters up of different things. I'm like, okay, so, in a sense, creating a safer place. So it caused me to find more posters. So I'd find more posters about, whether it's helplines or any posters related to queer things, and I'd post them up, and then I started getting kids coming out to me in my career courses, my planning, career and personal planning courses. And so those kids would join the Gay Straight Alliance, and I'd start that. And then I started setting up, as the Gay Straight Alliance, we started setting up booths at parent teacher nights. And so I didn't ask for permission for that. I asked for forgiveness after that. So we'd set up that. And so parents and teachers and students would, when they came in, would see, and I'd have pamphlets and other things as to why we needed a Gay Straight Alliance and other things. And the students and I would collect photos of any kind of graffiti or other slurs or damage that would show up in the schools that was related to anything to do against the Gay Straight Alliance, or anything that was against queer students or anything else like that. And we'd keep track of it, because they tried to make it disappear quite quickly, but it was quite obvious that there was a big pattern of violence against queer kids. And so we made good tracking of that kind of stuff. I mean, even my vehicle was targeted at the school at one point. And that, and we put posters up, and our posters would say, this is why we need a Gay Straight Alliance. And we would have events. We would do different events. And we did the Day of Silence at the school. And the first year we had about 112 students participate out of a school of, I think that year the school was about over 700 students. So that was the first year. By the third year, we had over half the student body participating, in part because we did activities like having kids write at lunch, and this is all volunteer participation, write what the Day of Silence meant to them. And we had a lot of kids talk about not the fact that they were gay, but they had gay family members and they had gay parents and other things. So, and then I put it into, we had the kids compile it into a video with music, and then we'd come and have the kids present at the staff meeting prior to the next year's Day of Silence, and talk to the teachers as to why it was important they put classroom posters up, like "That's so gay is not okay," which of course was the phrase at the time is "That's so gay," was a big thing back then. Kids would say it a lot, and try to get them on board, because a lot of the teachers didn't want to participate, and often they didn't intervene when there was homophobic language or kids were bullying in their classroom. And so it was my hope that hearing it from the kids and reading these letters that the kids wrote and having this information, it would show them why it was important as role models. They needed to be allies. Because just as it is now, if it's not just one person like myself being queer that makes the biggest difference, it's having myself and all the allies make action happen, because I can't be in every classroom. Yes, my classroom was considered a safe space, and I was told that by counselors and support workers that would come in from the community when they talked to students, because I had the posters up and I would stand outside my door and I would smile, and I had kids years later come and say thank you, and that I helped them to not commit suicide, and that they thought about me, and it made this the one place that they could go to at lunch or other places. But they needed those allies when they did get bullied in other classrooms, and they needed to have a place where they weren't going to get picked on all the time. And the only places of control are the places where adults are. And so we needed to gain that allyship. And thankfully it did help. Like, we did have a lot more adults participate at that point. And it actually helped to create our school as a magnet school. We had a lot of kids transfer from other schools because we became known as a much safer place. So not only did the Gay Straight Alliance become really well known to the fact that I was invited to help write a workshop at the BCTF with some other teachers for the secondary school workshop to tag on to the BCTFs. They had an elementary school one where they dealt with the That's So Gay and languaging, but then they wanted to have a secondary one, and because of the amount of work that our Gay Straight Alliance had done with events and other things at our school, I got to help write that. But also locally, we did like a safe spaces workshop, and that was before the BCTF or any other organization had sort of created a workshop, and where we invited any teachers or administrators. And we had quite a few teachers. I think we had about 10 or so teachers and one administrator come. And it was too bad it was only one administrator, but they came and we created little signs and they could put them up, creating safe space. And I mean, this is years before it became really something mandated by the province to have anything, or before it became sort of in vogue for any kind of districts to be doing this kind of stuff. We were doing cutting edge things here. And I was trying to push for gender neutral bathrooms from the moment I started teaching. And it's unfortunate we didn't get them, but I was trying. And, did all sorts of things. I did a community workshop the first year I was teaching for service providers, just to talk about languaging in service. So for nurses and intake workers at nonprofits and everything else like that. So they could learn about things like pronouns and learn about what the proper terminology was for somebody who was intersex, or, somebody who's gay and versus queer, what queer meant, and why people would use those terms and stuff way back at the beginning. And so it was, we did a lot. I mean, there was a lot of things that we did, and I had a really core group of kids. We went and did conferences in Kelowna and a couple other places. I mean, we did an immense amount of work for, I think, about 5 years, so the time that those kids went through high school. And then that core group kind of left, but they were amazing. And that the amount of buy-in that we had for those number of years, we saw that graffiti and other types of violence really decrease over that time, because we got buy-in. We got buy-in from our administration at the time. We got buy-in from staff, and we got buy-in from students. And we created a safe place that started probably with just my classroom and started branching out to the place where the school became pretty queer-friendly overall, and a place where kids actually wanted to come to school. So I'm pretty proud of that.
How did the loss of your best friend influence your dedication to this type of work?
Yeah, that was, my best friend, Justin, was huge. And Justin lived with me. So he lived in my basement. And that was right. What was interesting is I lost Justin right at the beginning of my career. And so we're like family. And in fact, his family's still my family. And so he made a huge impact. So I really don't know what my career would have been like had he not passed away. He passed away through suicide, and I think that's important to note. And his loss and has really affected me, because it's my belief that part of the reason why he died was because of the fact that he wasn't accepted for who he was, that he wasn't accepted for his sexuality. And that's my belief. Now, his family may have other beliefs, but that's my belief. And I think that it's important to also recognize that the church had a lot to do with what happened. And I think what's really great is I've been involved in the last year with other churches that are really working to become accepting and to actually ensure that members of the queer community are embraced. And I think there's been a real shift to recognize that there needs to be acknowledgement of the fact that a lot of the queer community have been harmed. And so with his loss, it really showed to me again that we also needed to talk about suicide in schools. And so one of the things that I made sure happened within my classroom was that the counselor was brought into every quarter that I taught career and personal planning to talk about suicide and talking about it, so that I had students that actually did disclose to me when they had issues. So that I was able to get a lot of kids some help, which was great. And I had a lot of kids disclose to me that years afterwards, I've had, I think, at least 3 kids now in the period since they've graduated come to me and let me know that they didn't commit suicide, just simply because they saw me and they were reflected and just in the school themselves. So that's important to me. So because I lost him, he reaffirmed to me what I had thought in my head when I finished my teacher education, that I needed to be reflecting for kids. And he reaffirmed that, and also reaffirmed that I need to make sure that we talked about the issues like suicide, like kids needing to be heard, and making sure that you're there for kids and helping them through the process. Like kids needing somebody to be there when they're trying to come out with their parents, because I had kids have that experience too, and being afraid, and then also trying to explain to them what their parents are going through, because sometimes the kids were really hard on their parents, and trying to explain to them, no, the reason why your girlfriend now can't stay over at your house is because your parents know that it's your girlfriend. And it's like, if it was a boy, it's no longer just a friend sleeping over. It's like, it's your boyfriend. So you have to look at it the same way. And sometimes kids just didn't grasp that concept. So it was an interesting process. And so, and also there was a lot of kids that I dealt with that grappled with the same thing that Justin did in terms of dealing with the church. I had a number of kids in high school that got thrown out of their church because they were basically told, you can choose your religion or your sexuality. That is hard when kids are growing up with the church and they love their God and they love their church, and to be told you can't have who you are and God and your community, because their community is their church. And so that's devastating, and that is something that is difficult for anybody at any age. But especially teenagers, because teenagers are, well, they're hormonal for one. They're going through a lot in terms of grappling with who they are. And they're often in a position where they're trying to just figure out tomorrow. And then you're taking this huge shift and you're basically saying, well, you can't see this community that you've depended on, that is supposed to be guiding you and supporting you. And now it's kind of like you can't ever see them again unless you just discard entirely who you are. And that can put them in a desperate position. And so it's really important to recognize that there needs to be support systems for kids. And, school counselors are so overworked. They have to do coursework and other things. And so it's really important that we make sure that all kids in schools are supported appropriately. Just in general, just as an aside, I think mental health in our communities are so underfunded and so overworked. I think it's important that our governments wake up and realize that part of the reason why we have the crises that we do is because we're not supporting our youth. If we were to support our youth properly, I think it would help resolve a lot of the issues that we have in adulthood. Because there's so many kids that I've seen from years ago, of kids that I've taught that are now on the street. And a lot of it goes back to just not being supported properly in school. These are kids that have struggled in school, and now they're on the street and they're addicted to opioids. And, they're grappling with issues that they need help with. And we need more help in schools. And if we attack these issues at their root, then, hopefully we're not going to see adults that are in crisis. So, yeah, it's reaffirmed everything. Like, honestly, it has solidified the fact that I will never stop advocating for youth in our community, queer or not, but just youth in general.
You've also gotten into the political scene in Vernon over the last couple of years. So what led you to pursue a career in politics?
Mm-hmm. Well, great question. I don't know if I'll call it a career yet, because I'm certainly not making any money off it. But interestingly enough, what kind of got me into it is the Rainbow Crosswalk. So it is definitely queer related. So when the city was discussing putting in the rainbow crosswalk, which was brought by one of our own queer members to of the community, he wanted to get a rainbow crosswalk in Vernon, which was approved. So that is awesome, and it is great. But every time it comes up for repainting or anything, of course the bigots come out. But it was very obviously debated, and of course it got approved because it was privately funded originally. Yeah, so with that, it kind of, I've always obviously been politically minded. I've grew up loving politics, being in politics. During grade 10, myself, Justin, and a few other members of our social studies 10 class, we went to City Hall and we were part of our mock city council. So that made a big impression. Patrick Nicol took us out to lunch, and we got to have the tour from him, which was huge to us, and I know it's huge to Justin, because Justin also ran for city council, and I was supposed to run with him, but I didn't. I chickened out when we were in our early 20s, and Patrick Nicol kind of mentored Justin a little bit, and Patrick got Justin involved in the Canada Day Society, which Patrick founded, and that made a big impression on Justin as well before he passed. And so Patrick was somebody who we both admired, and who was a city councillor, of course. And so I've kind of always kept an eye on city council and everything. One of our family friends, Alice Klim, she had been on city council. Other people I've known, like Juliet Cunningham's been on city council, and that, who is also one of our school district trustees for a number of years. And so, obviously it's been something of interest. And then when the Rainbow Crosswalk came up, and it kind of fired up the community and the bigots and everything, and it was just kind of one of those things where it was like, this is not great. And then the US election happened, and Hillary was supposed to win, as we all know, and Trump happened. And I went to the Women's March in Washington, the actual march in Washington. I was visiting my dad, who was working in the US at the time, and I did a detour, and actually, because I told him, I knew the election was happening, and when I knew Hillary lost, and I heard about this tiny little march starting right at the beginning. Like, I was there the evening somebody suggested this march in Washington on the inauguration day of Trump. And I said to my dad, I want to go to this. I have a feeling this is going to be something good. And I just need to do something. And because I've obviously watched Trump, as I've taught media studies, was something I started at the school. And I created the coursework and everything, because curriculum is something I did obviously design and do. And so I just, I've known him since The Apprentice began and all of that. And so my dad said, sure. He changed my ticket. So got a ratty hotel and in Maryland. And so I went. Just one day in Washington. And so I landed the evening of Trump's inauguration, and I stayed for the Women's March in Washington. And the one thing that stuck with me is the thing where it's like, get involved in your local politics, and because that's where the main decisions are made, and so I kind of brought that home with me, and so it really stuck with me, and I took it to heart. And so that's really pushed me to stay more involved than I necessarily have been, and has pushed me to want to continue my advocacy that I kind of started in the high schools, and pushed me to want to take it to the broader community, and not just advocate merely for youth, but more on a broader level, and more because I've caregived for my grandparents and take that sort of interest into from youth and seniors, just broader. And so that's what I've done. I really have wanted to, I want to break that ceiling too, of getting somebody who's not a business person, somebody who's not necessarily in that higher socioeconomic level, so somebody who's probably poor, because I'm definitely poor, and somebody who's disabled, somebody who's queer, somebody who has a learning disability, somebody who is definitely not your normal fit on city council, to speak for the greater community and to speak for those that don't necessarily feel they have a voice on city council. I know we have people who say they speak for those broader groups. But from watching city council for, since 2017, really, 2018, right around there. So it's like 6.5 years I've been watching city council meetings. I would definitely say that we need some change on city council, and we need to have different people on there. I mean, it'd be great if we get some younger people too. I mean, I turned 50 this year. I feel younger on there. I know we have some younger people than me on there though right now, but we definitely need more diverse people. And I feel like sometimes they don't think about broader community. And I believe that self-interest needs to be taken out of it. And I know from teaching, when I was teaching, I never thought about myself. I was always teaching for students to ensure their best interests were at heart. That, I'm not teaching for my individual beliefs. I'm teaching critical thinking and analysis and, skill-based learning, and making sure that they understand what the curriculum is and the skills that they need to know, and who I am and my beliefs are not at play. It's about what they need to know, and guiding them so that they can learn to learn, and learn how to be good citizens, and learn how to go into the world and have the tools that they need. And so sometimes I wonder if people are leaving it at the door when it comes to politics, And so it drives me to continue to have that conversation, and to continue to try to help engage the community in that conversation, because I want the community to stay engaged politically, especially in our municipal politics, because decisions are being made every single day that affect them. And some of these decisions need the light of day on them, and they need to be talked about. They need to be transparent and seen, not just at our local city council, but our regional level as well. Especially when we look at the cultural center that's going on, and we have 6.5 years, we haven't gotten anything built. And the budget keeps skyrocketing and other things, and one has to wonder why, and we need to talk about these things. Like, the one thing that's good about community is we need to talk about it as community and getting people involved. I'd like to see more people voting. Less than 20% of people voting municipally is atrocious. And bringing in upper levels of government and talking about why we aren't trying to improve that municipally as well. Because if it's not affecting them, they're not really concerned. And that's a problem too. Getting into community advocacy for me has been about helping people no matter what. So again, setting things aside, like, I will help people no matter what. It doesn't matter. It's not my issue. So, I help people, whether it's tenancy stuff, and because my family owns a fourplex. I mean, just because we're on the landlord side, I'm helping tenants all the time. I don't mind. That's the thing about me, is I'm here to educate. So I'll help people with the RTA if I can. And I'll try to point them in the right direction. And if people need help with bylaws, if I can help them, I'll help point them in the right direction. If people need help with whatever, it's non-judgmental. And I think that that's really what we need. We need people in our community that are in leadership positions that are non-judgmental and willing to help, and willing to give that extra little bit and reach outside. And that's what I hope to be role modeling and showing, is that we need people in our community that are willing to step in and help. And it's why I'm more than willing to, reach out. And if I can try to connect people, like I was able to connect a business that was willing to donate a dishwasher and a nonprofit that needed a dishwasher, and get those two together, that makes my day. And so that's the kind of thing that I think should be involved in our community. And I see it happening in our community. There are people that are doing it too. And that's the kind of thing that makes me proud to live in our community, because there are people out there doing that. And I would just like to see more of it. And I'd like to see more people join that conversation. And that's what I'm hoping to facilitate. And so getting into politics in that sense, what's driven me is just, what happens is when I see division, that upsets me, and I want to try to find common ground. And I'm hoping other people are trying to find common ground.
And representation.
Yes, and representation. And I'm hoping, and that's the thing, is I think that you can represent everybody, no matter who you are, if you make that effort. And that's the thing. Just because I'm queer and I'm disabled and I'm low income doesn't mean I can't represent everything. And just because people that aren't doesn't mean they can't. But from what I see, sometimes they don't. And so that's why I think sometimes we need to have differing perspectives, because I'm not seeing representation there all the time. And I think there's not necessarily the effort made to make that representation. And so I think we need to have some people on there that are willing to do that. And so that's why I think we do need some changes, because I think change is good sometimes. We need to shake it up a little bit. People get stagnant, they get comfortable. And so it's important every once in a while to give it a shake.
You helped create and found Vernon's Pride Committee and even served as the first Grand Marshal. What was the experience like, and what challenges did you face bringing Pride to Vernon?
Well, I'll have to say that I would give major credit to Sal, because Sal was the one that really was the impetus for bringing Pride and starting it. I was one of a number of people on the original Pride Committee, so just one of a number, not like
the one person.
Yeah, not the one person. Sal would be the one person if you're going to single anybody out.
Okay,
it would be Sal. And I think it was a great team effort to really get that first year going, when really there was no money, there was no budget. Sal put out a lot of their own effort, and they had their business and offered that up and put their own money into it, and we were able to get a number of sponsors, which was really awesome. The business community really stepped up that first year and allowed us to put on a number of events. I mean, when I first heard Sal's original thing and saying, "Oh, we're going to do a week," I was like, "Are you crazy? Like, we're doing a week? This is our first effort." Like, I thought maybe a March, maybe 2 events, and like, no, we're doing a week. I'm like, this is nuts. But it was amazing. It was phenomenal. And I was really honored to be chosen as the Grand Marshal. And they chose me in recognition of the amount of work that I'd done in the community over the last, few decades. And so it meant a lot to me to be chosen and to be able to speak to the community about what I've done. The challenges were money, for one, and just being able to get the word out. I mean, the fact that we also trying to break through, not having a budget to advertise. I mean, trying to make sure that the media got the word out. The number of people that showed up to the march, to the flag raising, to the events. I mean, the events were sold out, packed. I mean, it was amazing, and the energy was phenomenal. And yeah, now it's the 3rd year. The fact that the group that carried forth to create the society, the fact that they were able to create the society within the 1 year, which is basically we set everything up and gave them set up the society within that year. They were able to achieve that. They got help and achieved that society. And then they've had their board where they've had their stable members to carry it forward. And the amount of events that they've had the last couple of years to insured, because we're now on year 3. So they had last year's as their first year as a society, and now this year. And the events have been amazing. They've got some events that people really love. They've added new events this year as well. So they're trying out some different things. They've done some fundraising, like they had the drag bingo fundraiser, which went along really well, and people like myself donated towards that. And so, yeah, I think the one thing that's been amazing is that the community has really, really supported it, and really been grateful that it's come about. And it's not that we didn't have prides in Vernon before, because I think that's a little bit of a misnomer. There wasn't a Vernon pride because there was no Glow, and we had dances here before years ago, and we did have pride events in Vernon before, but they were connected to the greater Okanagan events of pride. So Kelowna would have Kelowna Pride, and then we would have associated pride events in Vernon, like we would have. We used to have ball games. We had movie nights and art shows and a few other things, but they were all associated with Kelowna Pride. Then we had our wonderful dances with No Glow and that kind of stuff, and they were associated with the other organizations around the valley. And then, of course, eventually No Glow folded, and so then Vernon Pride has now become created and stepped in, and now we've had the pride of Vernon itself, which I think is really phenomenal. And it wasn't because No Glow didn't try. Like No Glow tried back in the day, but politically they were blocked. And again, it was the sign of the times. So what No Glow couldn't do at the time, and Kelowna was only able to do, I think, because of the size and the lobby group, Vernon Pride was able to achieve. And I think that's due to the dedication of the community. The community never gave up, and there was people like Sal who decided it was time. And so that's important. I mean, we had our original sort of, I would say, icebreakers that came through and broke through to a certain point, and then they basically said, well, our time's done, and then Vernon Pride picked up the flag and carried it forward. And I think that's important for any kind of movement, where we have to carry forward. And I'm really hoping that Vernon Pride continues to be successful for years and years, because it's important that we have events that people can go to, where we can see each other, and again, see each other reflected. Because without those events, we're all intermingled. It's really hard to, like, are you gay? Are you not? I don't know. Are you queer? Like, how do we meet each other? And also to just feel comfortable showing affection in public. It still can feel very dangerous for people. There's a lot of people don't want to show affection. There's a lot of people new to the community that are unsure about whether or not that they can be affectionate or not. And so I think that's a challenge for people. And I think that's a challenge for Pride too, is having events where the community can be itself, but also integrated into the greater community. And especially in this political climate, where we're navigating very strange times, where we have a large part of our population that is very accepting, very welcoming. A lot of businesses very welcoming. One of the things that I have been doing is I have stickers for "You Are Welcome Here," and I'm the one that goes around to businesses, and I ask if they'll put the stickers on their door so that people can feel safe going into businesses. But one of the things that I also know is that there's a large segment of the population that likes to try to deface and rip those stickers off, because they don't want us to be safe. They don't want people to be comfortable in the community holding hands or being affectionate. And so we're facing that sort of opposition of being welcomed and not being welcomed in certain spaces and with certain people. And so it's important that we are having safe spaces to go to, especially for people who are, at risk. If you're a trans person, you may not feel comfortable going into a generalized space that has a lot of people that aren't part of the queer community. And so it's nice to have spaces where they're set up as safe places to go. And I think that's going to be a challenge for Pride in the years to come. And I think it's going to a challenge for our community as a whole, is ensuring that everybody is safe and ensuring that our community is a safe space for everybody. And that's part of the reason why I continue to do the work that I do. And I continue to, help Vernon Pride when they need it. And I'll continue to, along with other nonprofits. And, it's been really lovely working with nonprofits like Schubert Center, who's considered a senior center in a way, but I like to think of more like a community center, who've been, really strong in their stance for the queer community. They've really made it known that they will be a safe place for anybody who's queer. And I think that's phenomenal. And then there's a lot of businesses as well who've been really welcoming and really want to make sure that no matter who you are, you're going to be safe to walk through their doors. And I think that's a good thing about Vernon, is I think, considering from when I grew up as a kid, walking the streets and it was not a place that you could necessarily do that. You could walk hand in hand with your partner, or, you could necessarily be who you are safely. I think we've come a long way. I think there's a lot more opportunity for you to simply be who you are safely than not.
If our listeners could take away one thing from today's interview, what should it be?
I think the biggest thing is, two parts. One, vote municipally. That's number one. And two is that it's really important that, people get represented in the community. So whether that's in whatever field. For me, obviously, it's being seen in things like education, but really and also in things like city council, but it's really anywhere. So in the queer community, people need to show themselves so that our youth can see them. People need to represent everywhere, because we need to see who you are. Because if people who are low income need to know that where those people are, so that they can, hey, you're running for something, we want to be represented. Oh, you also have a disability. People who are disability want to have representation. People need to know and have reflected who they are, so that they can have a voice. Because everybody wants to have a voice, and everybody wants to see themselves, because it allows them to really have a role model, and also to have a voice. And in the end, that's really what it's about.
Well, thank you, Dawn, for coming on today.
Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
Yeah, of course. It was awesome. And I think that a lot of people will get something out of this.
Oh, I hope so.
Yeah. Perfect. And to our viewers and listeners, thank you for tuning in, and catch you next time. Bye.